over the past few years, a lot of things have really changed. The whole idea about, you know, men and what it means to be a man. And if you kind of look at society now, things are really, really different. You don't have the same mentality that you once had. You have a lot of people that, and, and I hate to really use the word, a lot of males that have become a lot more feminine, but that's kind of what the case is. You have, and I mean, it's understandable when you have men that are mainly raised by their mothers, or males that are mainly raised by their mothers. It's kind of to be expected. And even when you have women that try to say they're going to raise their sons to be men, if that's not something that's in you, then it's impossible to give it to somebody else. Um, and most of the time, what happens is you end up with women who raise their sons with their idea of what it means to be a man, but without understanding the inner thought process and the inner workings of a man. It's kind of hard to convey that to a son. And then you have people that will try to substitute, and they'll say, okay, well, I'll go ahead and have a mentor or have somebody on the side, to try to instill some things. But and I'm not saying that's a bad thing because it can help, but it's probably not going to do the job that you think it's going to do. Because in order for that to happen, you have to have somebody who has control over being able to guide, direct as a man sees fit. And when you have a situation, when you have somebody as a mentor or somebody just there to give advice, like I said, it can help, but it's not quite the same thing as when you have somebody who has the authority to discipline, to straighten you out, to get you on the right track. Um, and I think about even when I was growing up, and I was actually in the house with my godparents, and my godfather, he actually was the for what I knew at the time, he was my dad. I didn't know any different, and he raised me as his son. So I had him guiding, directing me, sitting me down when I was off. He would straighten me out. So I always had that constantly there. And then as an added bonus, I had men in the community who used to take me under their wing and talk to me and ride me places and talk to me about life and different things. So I kind of had there were pretty much three men. It was two other men in the community besides my godfather, or who I used to call my dad. The three together were kind of the ones that kind of mold me and shape me. So I constantly had that. And so when you have that type of a situation, it makes for a different experience. You don't see things the same way that somebody else does, and in the way a mother may see what it means to be a man. And I've seen what some women have said and their idea of manhood, but I've been around men, and I know that men who were raised by men don't think that way. And so, and I can almost, most of the time, if I see somebody and I'm around a man, I can tell you pretty much if he was raised by his mother or if he was actually raised by men. And I can also tell if they had maybe some male influence, but they weren't actually raised by men. And you can tell the difference, and I mean, and this is not a negative or a positive, it's just a fact. Um, but I can also speak to this here too, because even though, when I was with my godfather, I didn't feel any lack. I didn't feel like I was missing anything. I didn't feel like anything was needed. I had everything I needed. I mean, I had all the. I mean, I wasn't suffering from identity crisis or anything else. I mean, I had taken on the identity of the man that was raising me. But then when the time came where my biological mother had taken me back and moved me away from him, that's when the identity crisis started. I didn't have one before then. I didn't have a situation of, well, who is my real father? That was never even a thought to me. Because at that point, once you separate a boy from the men that are raising him and you put him in a situation of, or you put him in a female environment, what ends up happening is now the questions that you have, there's nobody there to answer them. Times when you may be thinking wrong or getting off track, there's nobody there to correct it. So, may have a mother that's trying to correct it, but the shoe doesn't fit. And so, but the one thing, and I personally feel like I would have been much better off, for me personally, had I been left with my godparents. Because my godfather, I think that influence was crucial. And so when you get separated at a certain age from your foundation, and now you're kind of out here, and then I even remember times my mother would always say, "Oh, be a man," as if the one who could teach me, you just separated me from him, and now you got me out here by myself. Tell me to figure it out. Now I know she didn't mean no harm. I know she didn't mean she did the best she could with what she knew. I think some selfishness was involved in that too, because I know at one point when I had mentioned wanting to live with them, and she had made it known that there was no way she was going to leave her child and let somebody else raise them. Now, I think sometimes that can be a mistake, because when you take on the my child mentality, then it's no longer about what's best for your child, it's about what's best for you. Because at that point, you care more about what you want and how it affects you than what's actually best for your child. And sometimes the best thing you can do for your child is drop them off and walk away. Sometimes that is the best solution. Sometimes the best thing to do is just say, "Here, I'm out." Sometimes that's what needs to be done. But selfishness for a lot of people won't allow them to do that. Won't allow them, because their feelings matter more than the outcome of their child. And but I can say this here is but the thing that I will say that is been helpful and has really opened my eyes was the fact that once that separation made me want to know who my biological father was. And I can tell you that after connecting, there are things about myself that I probably would have never known had I not connected with my actual dad. Because once we got connected, I understood where my personality comes from. I didn't know there was, nobody could have made me believe that not being connected or being around somebody for a certain period of time could change. I mean, that you could have so much of somebody's personality, so much of the way somebody thinks, so much of the way, somebody responds and how they act. You couldn't have made me believe that it's possible for two people to be that much alike who've never been around each other. And I understand now more than ever before, there's something that comes through DNA. There's some things that are transmitted that nobody on earth would ever believe or could explain how that can happen. But I mean, meeting my dad, it was almost like meeting my twin. Well, I guess not, maybe what's my twin, because I can't really be twin because I came from him. But it's crazy. It's something else when you really begin to see, wow. So that's why I act like that. And I mean, stuff that I do that just nobody even knows about, he does it. And so, so anyway, but the whole point I'm making is that when you look at manhood, and I look at my father's, even his temperament, even his temper, and it's crazy how much I got from that man. But anyway, but all in all, mentality and everything else. But but the whole point is that when I look at him, and even though I was raised by one man and he was raised by his father, the one thing that I've noticed that we click on is understanding what it means to be a man. It's not a feminized version. It's not a female. It's not through a feminine lens. It's truly understanding how men function and how men stand on their own feet, how men make decisions, and how men have an outlook on the world. It may not always be the way most women would want it to be. It may not always be appealing and pleasing to most women, but it's a reality of being a man. And the one thing I can actually say, there's a confidence, there's an assurance, there is a steadiness, a rock solidness, and a steadfastness that you have when you have that, versus people I've seen that don't. because the people that don't, they seem to always be in a situation of unsurety and uncertainty and questioning things and needing to ask somebody else's opinion or advice, or they go the completely opposite direction where they're trying to figure out for themselves and they're lost. They don't want to admit they're lost, and they're just out here kicking and scratching and being hard headed, being angry, acting out, all because they don't have any direction. So I think one of the best things that a mother could ever do is say goodbye to her son. Because I think that when she can say, here, hand them off, do what you need to do. If I got to stay out the picture, if I got to walk away, what that does, that shows that you care more about your child than you do about you. And I can promise you, a lot of the self-esteem issues that children go through, a lot of things, it wouldn't exist if it was just here and by. It makes a difference. And I can speak from experience. I've been on both sides of the coin, and I can tell you, even my godmother, even my godfather, even after I moved my mother, when I got older, I went right back to him. So basically, it was like continuing education. Where we left off at, we picked right back up on. And him and also the men in the neighborhood still there. So, when I turned 18, we were all there, still learning, still being taught, still being educated. It just kind of went on. Then years later, going back and forth and being around everybody, it makes a difference. And the one thing that I've noticed when I look at other people in my life that I've known, other males that I've seen, and I look at the instability. What I mean by I mean mental instability, where they're not sure, they can't make a decision and stick with it without worrying. They have a lot of feminine emotions that regulate them, and I think we all need to have a balance. I don't think we ought to be all one side or all one way. I think there needs to be some. That's why mothers are important. I will say mothers are important because mothers bring the empathy and the more softer side, because everything doesn't need to be hard. So the mothers are important because you need that balance. But for the sake of identity, self-assuredness, steadfastness, and being able to say something and stick with it, make a decision and not move. And some people may say, well, I know some people raised by their fathers and they don't have that. Well, the question is, who raised their fathers? Were their fathers raised by their fathers, or were their fathers raised by their mothers? And when I say being a man, I'm not talking about necessarily being hard and tough, because being a man, it doesn't really, the truth be told. And check this out, and this is something I think a lot of people miss. Truly being a man has nothing to do with being tough. It has something to do with the way you think, has something to do with the way you reason, has something to do with the way the way you handle things and the way you approach life. That's why it's kind of funny whenever I see somebody talking about, especially women, I want my son to be a man. And the first thing they do is think, well, let me put him in football. That's the dumbest thing you can do, because football has nothing to do with thinking. And football can't make you a man. It can just make you maybe maybe a little bit more savage, but most feminine men are savage anyway. Most men are a lot more self-assured. You're going to protect, you're going to do what you got to do. But you got nothing to prove unless you have to prove something. But, it's a difference. It's a difference. And I do understand why, I believe it was Deion Sanders said that if he wanted to get for his linemen and all of his defensive backs or whatever, he want to have all of them. He want them to come from a single mother household, because they're gonna be angry, they're gonna be unbalanced, they're gonna all this other stuff. But he said if he was looking for a quarterback, he wanted a quarterback from a two-parent home, because he needed to have somebody who knew how to think, somebody who had been guided properly. It makes a difference, and regardless of how some people may feel about it, all men are not created equal. There are those that are grounded and those that are still trying to figure life out. And the difference is whether or not they had a man to guide them. Well, that's all I have to say, and until next time.